Welcome back to We Move Through Stormy Weather, a Phish podcast where we compare and contrast songs and the evolution of their jamming styles throughout the band's career. My name is Ryan Storm, and today I am joined by Brian Brinkman. Brian brings a passion for storytelling and a deep knowledge of music to the creative and production teams at Osiris Media. Following a decade in international higher education focused on student advising and program development, Brian started the Beyond the Pond podcast in 2017, quickly growing the show in status through narrative development, social engagement, quality editing, and a unique understanding of rock history. Focused on unearthing the subtle aspects of a narrative, Brian oversees production for Undermine, 36 from the Vault, The Drop, The Ravine, Late Era, and Helping HFPod On Tour. Brian holds a BA in European and Islamic History from the University of Montana, just as like a bonus. Brian, you can say hi.
Ryan, how are you? Thank you so much for having me on. This is a total honor.
Thank you for being on. I'm really excited to talk some Phish from you. Brian and I met for the first time back in October at the Forum show in LA. And we decided then, like, yeah, let's do the podcast. So
let's do this thing, man.
I'm excited. You know, we had to take a couple of months off since November, but I'm back. It's January. It's 2022. I'm really, really excited about everything that We Move Through Stormy Weather has in store for this year. By this point, the special episode about the Goose Jam of the Year 2021 bracket will be out. That one is going to be awesome. And that's got lots of great content. And before we dive into this, if you guys aren't already, please check out ryanstorm.substack.com. I have been posting since early October, show reviews, lots of jam breakdowns, and actually you can see my notes from every podcast episode on there. So there will be a link in the description of the podcast. Sign up for the mailing list. You'll get everything delivered right to your inbox. It's super handy. And yeah, so we're going to dive in now. Brian, why don't you talk a little bit about, before we get into the song, why don't you talk a little bit about how you got into Phish?
So I like to think about how I got into Phish kind of as this discovery that both I made and other people made for me that kind of intertwined in a crossroads of my life when I had learned a ton about classic rock. I was kind of in a purgatory state in terms of the type of music that I was listening to at the time. I didn't really like a lot of the modern music that I was listening to. And at the same time, I've always been, and I really was at this point in my life when I was around 16, a huge sports fan. And so all these kind of things kind of interspersed in a stew where I kept seeing in my freshman year of high school Phish shirts around the halls in different classes,
I wish people
study
were wearing
hall.
Phish shirts when I was in high school.
There was like a small select crew of people, and I was like loosely friends with some of them, but not totally friends with others. And I
see, when I was in high school, I was that entire crew. It was just me.
That was all you. Just you were the guy.
Yeah, I was the only one. Yeah.
Well, I asked a friend of mine, shout out to Matt Bentley, in freshman year math class, who is Phish? What is it? Took me a while to like figure out like that the logo and the play on words, the PH thing. And he just like went off, and this was about 6 months after Big Cypress, 5 months after Big Cypress, and he was like, you need to buy Rift. That's like the best way to listen to them. So I went out, I bought Rift. They piqued my interest, but it wasn't something that totally connected with me. For whatever reason, though, over the next couple of years, I bought Hampton Comes Alive. I bought a live one. Somehow I ended up with Farmhouse. And around this time, I got into the Dave Matthews Band, and I was realizing that my musical interests were tending towards experimental music, but still based in rock music. I loved the idea that a band could play a concert and a song that sounded one way on an album could open up into something completely different. That was a totally new concept to me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, all of this leads to the summer of 2001 when I spend, I think, 10 weeks as a camp counselor at the summer camp I grew up going to. And one of the early days that I was there was only counselors there. We were all getting training. So it was a lot of fun. It was like me and people within a 10-year age gap of me. So I was like learning a lot of things.
I love staff week.
It was great. It was the best.
Yeah.
And I was wearing the Dave Matthews, like the classic Dancing Nancy shirt. And this guy, Aaron Klein, comes up to me and goes, "You like Dave Matthews Band? Have you ever listened to Phish?" And I said, "Yeah, I've listened to a little bit." And he handed me a tape of 11/17/94, set 1, which opens with Helter Skelter. And it's the only other time they played it other than the Halloween show. And it's really important that they open up with Helter Skelter because one of my early musical moments was when I went to see Rattle and Hum with my dad when I was like 3 years old. And U2 opened up with Helter Skelter. It was like a defining moment for me in terms of getting into music. And so I'm hearing Phish play this song, which was something I never expected. And it kind of hooked me immediately. And that set goes on to be just like a classic fall 94 set. You got Divided Sky, you've got a Wilson, you have a really excellent Colonel Forbins in A Vibrational Life, in A Mockingbird, and you close with this just like 10-minute ferocious Down Disease. That tape was the tape that got me and was the tape that put me in a position where I said, I have to hear more of this music and I have to hear it as much as possible. And over the course of the next 6 months, I was collecting tapes. I was buying all the live Phish shows when they came out. I saw my first Trey show. And over that 6-month period in time, what started as curiosity, started as like pure ignorance, what started as me looking for something, ended
Mm-hmm.
up as I'd found the best band I will ever find in my entire life. That is a continual rabbit hole I keep diving deeper and deeper into, with no bottom has yet been reached.
Right. It's endless. So, was your first Phish show like right after the return for 2.0?
My first Phish show was actually, we're going to be talking about it today. It was
Oh.
2/20/2003 at the Allstate Arena, which I saw most of my early concerts at the Allstate Arena. I grew up about 20 minutes south of there. And so when Phish announced that they were playing there, I was like, this is just perfect. I've seen so
That's
many
it. Yeah.
minor league hockey games here. I've seen so many concerts here. And yeah, that was my very first show.
That's awesome. So let's talk about your song pick, which is Seven Below. Really cool. I think I had only heard this 2/20/03 Seven Below a couple of times before I listened to it just like an hour ago. But yeah, what grabs you about this jam, and what grabbed you at your first show about this jam?
So it's funny. So Seven Below, Round Room was the album that came out right after I got it. That was the first new Phish I'd ever heard.
Mm-hmm.
And Seven Below initially I didn't like. It didn't sound like a song. It sounded like an idea.
Right.
I kind of thought
Well,
the riff
there's
was
not much in the way of like intricacy or like
right.
there's only a few lines of lyrics and there's that one riff.
Yeah, it was one of the things that like initially put me off about Round Room, but as it over time has made it's my favorite Phish album for a number of reasons. And
Okay.
one of
Yeah.
them is that a lot of the songs sound like sketches and sound like an idea that's really just a leaping off point for a jam. And Seven Below, Waves, 46 Days to a certain extent, although that's a little bit more of a song proper.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these are songs that like when you listen to Phish in that December 2002 period, that fall 02 period, they sound like they're trying to rediscover who they all are 2.5 years or so since their last show. And Seven Below to me, as I've evolved with this song and as I've come to love the song, and it's one of my favorite Phish songs to see live, really sounds like that reconnection period where what is Phish ultimately? They're a riff, they're a groove, and they're a jumping off point for a jam. And Seven
Right.
Below is perfect about that. So that first show I saw, there were 4 or 5 Round Room songs played, which again, in the moment, I didn't love because this is my first Phish show. I want to hear Mike's songs.
The
I want to hear
hits.
You Enjoy Myself. I want to hear like
Right.
the Phish songs I've like, grown up with or I've like gotten into the band because of. not all this new material. Now, I'm going to pause because I know that certain members of your audience are probably like howling at their headphones right now, wondering like, did I hate this show? It's a very, it's a truly 2.0 show. I have come to love this show, and I've come to love the approach the band
It's
gave.
a great show.
It's a really great show. It's a very deep, heavy jamming
Yeah.
show. It was a
It's
it was a
a very characteristic of Winter '03 show. Like it follows a lot of similar themes to shows like 226 or 228 or any number of other ones.
I would argue it's the most Winter '03 show because they're pushing all this new material. The band doesn't say a word the entire night, and there's so much, like, you go back to the first set and you get this fusion between the darkness of Simple and the bright, uh like,
Jabu.
big funky jamming of the Jabu.
Yeah, I love that Jabu. And then you
It's
have
so
that like the tweezer and the seven below that we're going to talk about more in depth, and that pebbles to close the second set as
yeah.
well.
So, this song to me, it just is really representative of an era. And when I
Mm-hmm.
listen to this particular version, it sounds like if you were to play someone one track from 2003 to give them an idea of what did Phish sound like, what was Phish doing in 2003, this jam really kind of exemplifies that in the way that it evolves totally effortlessly from the song proper. It stays somewhat tied to the Seven Below theme, but
Yeah.
figures out all these little spaces to
Well,
jam through, which is very different from the 2018 version.
yeah, and one thing that really grabbed me about this one, again, as I say in almost every episode, I'm a keyboard player and I love Page. And in this jam, like what he's doing on the piano for the first half is just unbelievable. Like he is
He's
just leading like crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting. I Not to jump around too much, but like
We love tangents here on We Move Through Stormy Weather.
um I went to Coventry, and I figured that's the end of Phish. And I was almost 20 years old. I was 19 at the show, and I kind of figured they were done. And so I made a pretty conscious effort following Coventry to take this like 3 or 4 year period of my life that had been so dedicated to listening to Phish and try to apply the knowledge I'd gained from deep diving their music to exploring other areas of indie rock, progressive rock, lower or lesser known classic rock albums that I wasn't aware of. And I say all this because a couple of years later, when I was studying abroad, I became friends with a guy who was a huge Phish fan, but also a musician, which I'm not a musician. And one of the things he said to me, which you just referenced, was, you know, if you really want to understand Phish and Phish's jamming, you have to listen to Page. And I've
Yeah.
always been drawn to Trey. And he
Well, it's
specifically
natural. It's natural to, as someone who's not a musician, especially, to focus on what Trey's doing because
yeah,
more often than not, he's at the forefront of the jam. He's leading, and the
right.
guitar just naturally, the guitarist usually, no matter whether it's a band like J-Rad where Joe Russo is the front man, it's all the nature of this music is inherently that the guitar sticks out. The guitar is at the forefront regardless of what the song is.
Yeah, and it's just like kind of the natural place that a lot of our ears go because of rock music.
Yeah. And also, side note, the parallel I just drew to J-Rad is kind of irrelevant because they play the music of the Grateful Dead, which is fronted by guitarists. But
no, but
anyway.
I get it. I
Yeah.
totally get what you mean.
You get the point
But
I was trying to make. It was just a
yeah,
redundant parallel.
but he and I were having one of those like lengthy conversations over beers in the Netherlands that happens when you study abroad.
Yeah.
And we're talking about Phish. And I'm at a point where like this was 3 years after Coventry. I haven't really listened to Phish a lot in the preceding 3 years. I've had moments where I've thrown on a couple, shows I really liked. But anyway, he goes, you should listen to this version of Seven Below from Chicago 2003. And I was like, oh my God, that was my first show. And he was like, just listen to Page. And so I biked home that night and I put it on my headphones. It's, one of the first times I've listened to Phish in months at this point. And I just tried to listen to Page throughout the whole jam. And the way he goes from the grand piano to the clav and then back to the grand piano towards the end of it as they move into pebbles,
Mm-hmm.
I could hear his ideas being like 3 or 4 measures before what Trey or Mike would do, or
Yeah.
Fishman follow what Page was doing. And that moment, that was fall of 2007, that kind of restructured me to be listening to Phish. And it's an interesting like tangent because this jam was both one of the first jams I ever saw live in person, and also one of the reasons I got it back into Phish about a year before they announced their reunion in the fall of 2008.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's really cool. So, yeah. Wow. Um, yeah. So, wow. I'm not talking coherently right now. Yeah, I was really blown away by Page's piano work, especially like what he's doing on clav is really cool as well. But it's the piano towards the beginning. He's just so aggressive and so assertive, which
Yeah.
you don't hear a lot from him in this era and 1.0. That's more of a something you'd expect from my pick, which fall 2018 guy. I picked 12/31/18. Which is my favorite, which also is a fantastic jam for Page,
Yeah.
but in a very different way,
Yeah.
which is cool. He's being a leader, but more as a part of the whole, as opposed to leading and having the other three follow him.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about these two jams through the context of Page, because one thing that always strikes me about especially that late '02, early '03 sound. You didn't hear this
Mm-hmm.
as much in 2004, less so in the summer. But like if you listen to the Victor disc, which was all sessions that the band played in New York City in December 2002, and
It's
then you
Fish's
listen to the
TED
winter.
tapes.
Their TED tapes, yes, it's my dream that they release that on vinyl. And then you listen to this Seven Below, you hear something that's like a very very specific sound to the era, which is Trey playing this gravelly, just like kind of dark and seedy guitar tone that
Mm-hmm.
really sets the tone for the way the band is sounding. And Page, very different from today, playing the grand piano and really focusing on the grand piano. And it gives it
Yeah.
this like dystopian type of sound that is so associated with that period of Phish. Whereas the 12/31/18 version, we're hearing a band that is a year and a half past the Baker's Dozen. And I don't know anyone that came to the Baker's Dozen ready to push the band forward and change the band more so than Page. His synthesizers completely changed the dynamic of the Baker's
Oh,
Dozen,
absolutely.
and then they come back in 2018, and especially that fall and New Year's Eve run, his synthesizers have suddenly pushed Trey to evolve in a way that we hear some of the best Trey that we've heard in probably 3 or 4 years during the fall of 2018 and the
Yes.
New Year's
And
Eve run of
and and
2018.
before people get all up in arms about how Trey was actually playing terribly in fall 2018, his improvisational playing in fall 2018 is among the best I've heard. His playing of composed sections in fall 2018, as evidenced by my first two notes of I made on 12/31/18, being right on cue, Trey botches the melody and Trey botches it again. I don't think
Yeah, there's
I don't think that sentence came out coherently, but I think my point got
no, no, no,
across.
no. I get it. It's fall 2017, 2018, and I guess you could even throw in there 2019 Trey is really interesting because you have this dichotomy of a guy who has completely rediscovered how to express himself through improvisation,
Yeah.
which for a long time in early 3.0 he had a really hard time with. I mean, I will champion like 2009's like August 2009 jams forever, but there's a lot of there's a lot of focus on like these very quick atmospheric sounds, which the band couldn't really do anything with
Right.
in their jams are not like the highest of quality. By the time you get to fall 18, his ideas are almost limitless, and the idea in his head to the playing from an improvisational standpoint is I mean, I would argue fall 2018 is the last best tour prior to 2021.
Oh,
Just in terms of
absolutely.
the creativity. But yes, his overall playing lacked tightness. And I think part of that is he's so focused on improvisational music, but he's also writing like 45 songs a year, which
Yeah, like well,
it's
at
really
this
hard to keep up
time,
with your own material then.
I think at this time, uh, right after this run would have been, I think, when they recorded Ghosts of the Forest,
Yeah.
because it was in rehearsals. No. They recorded Ghosts of the Forest earlier in 2018 because that was for Between Me and My Mind. But he went right into rehearsals for Ghosts of the Forest after the New Year's run of 2018. I remember it had been
That would
announced,
make sense.
and then like on January 1st, there were like Instagrams of him and Fishman already rehearsing. So I
Yeah, that
think,
would make
yeah,
sense because Ghost of the Forest was spring 2019. Yeah, so they would have
yeah,
recorded the album earlier that summer.
yeah. And I think, talking about his playing, like obviously fall 2018 being the last best tour before 2021 happened is for sure, like, the improvisation in 2019 is still developing further than it was in 2017 and 18, but in 2019 they lost some of the fire that they had in 17 and 18. I think, you know as much as messy as the type 1 play was in much of 2018, there's still so much energy to it in a lot of
Mm.
places. Like if you listen to versions of Sand, like his solos may not be as intricate or as many notes as they usually are, but there's just so much energy in it. In 2019, a lot of the type 1 playing just seems lifeless to me. And,
Yeah.
I didn't really say that as much at the time, but I find it hard to listen back to like a random MoMA dance from 2019. Like one that I can pull off the top of my head, I think is like the one from July 9th at Mohegan. The
Mm, mm.
MoMA it's just kind of there. Like it doesn't really feel like they're all playing together, and it's just kind of lifeless. His tone was also, kind of weird in 2019. Like there was just a lot. It was a very transitional year. I think
Yes.
2019 needed to happen to get to 2021. But you could kind of hear it kind of coming back a little bit, in that Mexico run and the New Year's run before the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
Um, but I actually think the pandemic was a really good thing for the band,
Yeah. I
especially for Trey.
Yeah, I tend to think of 2019, and there's really no other way to think of it because the pandemic came and we don't have another year to, compare it to. But I tend to think of 2019 as really the end of the 3.0 experiment. And
Mm-hmm.
it's this point where, and it's a challenge of where Fish continues to be today, but I think that they did a better job of working through this in 2021. But there's so much energy and creativity still to this day around new songs and around communicating as songwriters. And, I think that 2019, you see a band that has debuted.
Two full albums of material into their rotation.
Two full albums, but you also have to remember that, like, Big Boat comes out in October of 2016, gets played, those songs get played pretty thoroughly in the fall of 2016.
Yeah,
But then a lot of those songs are shelved until the third set of New Year's Eve 2016. A lot of those songs aren't played throughout that run, which you would expect that run to have like a highlight version of, one or two songs.
I think they're saving it
Um,
for the gag set though. Like they were saving that for the
right. So
the
they
big
saved it
boat
for that
set with the
third set.
horns and everything. Yeah,
Right. But then 2017, you have this really weird thing where like Big Boat almost gets shelved as an album. Many would
it
say
was a
rightly
good idea.
so. It
Yeah,
was a very good idea, but like you play these 13 shows at Madison Square Garden, you're not going to repeat any songs. So none of these Big Boat songs go into the rotation in 2020 or in 2017. So a lot of these songs are still like relatively untested songs going into 2018, 2019. And so 2019, you have like 40 new Phish songs that have been written in the previous 36 months. And they all kind of, we need to figure out where they fit. Plus, you have a new song like Mercury, relatively new in 2018, 4 or 5 years old at that point, that is stretching its legs. And so they want to play that song every couple of shows. You have Ruby Waves that wants to stretch its legs almost from the get-go. And obviously the Alpine Valley version happens.
I was at the debut version in Toronto and remember being
Really
like,
good
whoa,
version.
like it packs a punch. It's 9 minutes, but it packs a serious punch. And I think, songs like Mercury, I think people by 2018 were already warmed up to as a song as well. And even in 2015, when it debuted, they weren't sure where to put it, and it kind of
Yeah.
had a few years of just kind of sitting in flux. But I think people are more responsive positively to a song like Mercury being debuted than like, a song like, I don't know, I'm going to pick a Ghost of the Forest song or a Cast of Vax song, because Mercury has the jam potential that eventually gets shown. These Cast of Vax songs that have so much jam potential, and for the most part, the Ghost of the Forest songs outside of Ruby Waves, obviously, haven't really been explored to their fullest potential. Like, we haven't had a 20-minute We Are Come to Outlive Our Brains somehow.
Right.
There have only been like a handful of examples of Cast of Vax songs getting jammed out. And one thing that's interesting that just occurred to me is when they debuted Chilling Thrilling for Halloween 2014, they started incorporating those songs into set lists almost immediately. But they kind of fit, I think, where they put them. And Martian Monster obviously is the one with the greatest longevity. And 2021, we really saw a reduction in the number of Chilling Thrilling songs in the rotation. Like it was just Martian Monster, I think, until the fall.
Yeah, I think you're right.
I'm wrong. I may be wrong. I don't remember if there was a Your Pet Cat during the summer.
Well, maybe there was one at Deer Creek, now that I'm thinking.
But there was also Santos was being played way more frequently than any of the other Cast of Vax songs. So
yeah,
I think they've really looked at the placement. I kind of skipped ahead here, but they've looked at the placement over time. And 2019 was just one of those years where they decided to go all out with these songs and just throw them at the wall. And they also happened to be songs that Trey really wanted to play all the time. So they ended up getting Trey DHD ripcorded out of jams.
Yeah, I think as well, like, if you go back to the Chilling Thrilling stuff, like at that point, Wingsuit comes along, but prior to Wingsuit, they weren't really debuting songs post Joy. You get Steam in 2011. You
Halfway
get
to the Moon.
Halfway to the Moon, but like these are songs.
A couple of Mike songs that are like one.
A couple of Mike songs,
Dr.
but these
Gable.
aren't songs that like Dr. Gable, that like fully impact the rotation. A lot of them just don't stick, or a lot of them are like fairly rare. Wingsuit really kind of showcases a shift for the band where they're going to try to write actual songs, and they're going to try to write songs that can stand on their own, that don't necessarily need to jam. Chilling Thrilling 2014, huge hit within the fan base, and so obviously those songs are littered across 2015. But following that, from 2015 onwards, I mean, we're looking at upwards of 90 Phish songs that have been written between 2015 and now that have to be incorporated in the rotation. And to your point, a lot of the Ghost of the Forest songs, and even Caswell Vox to a certain extent, seem to have jamming potential, but it also seems like the band really wants to focus on how do we play these songs as best as we can.
Right.
And the only other thing I would add is 2019 is the first time I really felt like Phish was getting old. And it sounds to me like the most vulnerable year I've ever heard of them. And maybe this is just all the Ghost of the Forest songs, but that is an overhang of the year to me, to my ears, in both a good and bad way.
Right. To me, I remember thinking fall 2014, listening to some of those shows. Again, I was 14 at the time, but I remember thinking for the first time, like, gee, like Trey sounds like he's like, like a mess. Like, I just remember him flubbing a ton. during that tour. But I think Fare Thee Well kind of rescued him there before it became
I also
super
tend to
super
think of
prevalent.
that tour as like there's no Halloween album that they could stumble into jams easier than Chilling Thrilling. And you
Right.
hear it like there's a great version of Harry Hood from San Francisco on that tour where they basically play a Dogs jam. And I
Hmm.
think that one thing that tends to like challenge them in that tour is that it's very clear they don't want to take their jams towards a Chilling Thrilling jam. And so there's a lot of hesitancy to jam. And on top of that, like to your point, there's a lot of sloppy playing. 2014 and 2019 in a lot of cases remind me of each other in
Yeah.
the sense that like summer 2014 they're pushing Fuego harder than they've pushed any album since maybe
Oh
Billy
my
Breathes.
god.
um and then 2019, I don't know if they're necessarily pushing Ghost of the Forest, but that's just where Trey is feeling like he wants to play those Ghost of the Forest songs because that's where his mind and his heart is at that moment.
Right. And I think 2019 got a lot more maligned at the time than 2014, though, again, grain of salt from my opinion, because in 2014 I wasn't that actively involved in the Phish online community. In 2019 I was. But to me, I think, 2013 was a great year of Phish. Like fall 2013 was like the first amazing
Unbelievable
tour of
tour.
3.0. But summer 2014, when they started going like the line in the middle of the second set, it was just more like okay, like it was a fluke. Like fall 2013 happened. Like we're getting a couple of 25-minute fuegos in here that are really cool, and
Yeah.
you get like a bright spot like the Randalls night 3 second set. But for the most part, it's like okay, it's 3.0 Phish. This is it.
Right.
But in 2019, you've just had you know the 20-month stretch of the Baker's Dozen, the New Year's Run 2017, which is incredible. Summer 2018, which, very controversial, but I think Summer 2018 is an incredible tour. Like, there's so many incredible jams. Again, Trey's tone isn't the best and lots of slop, but so, like, there's so much good jamming on that tour. Fall 2018 again, and Mexico 2019. That is an incredible 3-night run as well. That's basically part of fall 2018. And so that 20-month stretch just being so good and like so packed with crazy shows and moments, and then you get a year like 2019 that's like, the highs are high, like, the MSG Tweezer and the Alpine Ruby Waves, but the lows are very low. Like Charleston night 3.
Right, right. And it's interesting like all of this kind of around this December 31st, 2018 show, which I've gone back and listened to, I think is one of the stronger recent New Year's shows. I
Yeah.
feel like since around 2014, 2015, I really like the second set from the 2014 show. But
That's a great set.
yeah, it's a really good set. But in recent years, I've found that the New Year's shows have really been about the gag and less about the music. And it seems as though musically, they're really putting all of their effort into the 28th, 29th, and 30th, especially. And then the 31st is kind of just like, here's some fun Phish songs. And we're going to do a really big gag that cost a lot of money and required a lot of production. So that's where Headspace is. But in
Right.
2018, that second set is one of the stronger New Year's Eve second sets, and it for whatever reason just gets overlooked, doesn't get talked about, probably because the previous two shows were so incredible in the
So
29th
good.
and 30th.
Yeah.
But it to me, you got Disease, Farmhouse, Seven Below, Twist, and then I believe then you get the Hood
Hood
passing
passing
through
through
Hood.
Hood. Yeah.
It's a really fluid second set. It
Except
showcases
the
some,
Hood passing through Hood wasn't really done properly, and they
yeah,
bailed
yeah,
out. They bailed out of a Hood jam that was getting really good. But
yeah.
other than
They've
that,
done like hood sandwiches, and I don't
I don't like it.
It's not my particular favorite thing, but I felt as though it worked in the sense that like passing through the way that ended the Casvote Vox set felt like a real like emotional conclusion to the set, whereas Harry
Yeah.
Hood always seems like a very emotional conclusion to whatever show it's played in. But that second set, you hear, this classic jam vehicle and Disease, and then this
It's a really
2.0
good
jam
disease too.
vehicle. It's a very good Disease. And then this 2.0 jam vehicle that is played way rarer than it should in Seven Below. Both of these versions really showcase the creativity the band is playing with towards the tail end of 2018. And
Yeah.
that run, you kind of listed it, but like from I mean, I think you could go all of 2018 through Mexico 2019 as just like an incredible hot streak. I think if you wanted to focus it a little bit more,
From July 2017 through Mexico 2019, I think.
sure. And to be fair, I mean, I would even back that up to the tour finale from summer 2016, where they play Chula Vista and they play this rockin' show that has nothing in common with the previous 20
Yeah.
dates on the tour.
Yeah.
And from there, you've got um, uh, this
Lock-in
great
appearance.
festival run at
Yeah.
Lock-In, an incredible Dick's
Dicks.
run, very strong fall tour, New Year's run
I
that's got some big highlights, an incredible Mexico run that's super overlooked, Baker's Dozen all the way up through that Mexico run. Yeah, 2020.
Absolutely. I think I'm a little bit hesitant to include the latter half of 2016 in, just because fall 2016, they're still kind of finding their legs again in terms of being like consistently amazing, because even if you look at a lot of year like 2015, it's still pretty uneven in terms of awesome shows. Like they'll play like a really amazing 2-night run or a run of a couple of shows, or you'll still get a stretch like uh that late July leg before Atlanta, I think, through
Mm,
the
yeah.
south. There's like some weird shows in there, lots of uneven calls. They're still putting Fuego songs in the second set a little bit, I think. um but then it picks up in the latter half and is
Yeah.
incredible. So there's still a lot of uneven stuff, which is true to a lesser extent for a tour like summer 2018. Even in a show that's like not very good by the tour standards, like the opener, like July 17th in Tahoe. If you look at that show, there's like a extended MoMA, which is really cool. There's like a 17-minute No Men, which, while it's not anything crazy, it's still a pretty good jam, and a really, really, really nice hood that Trey only
Mhm.
botches the landing on a little bit.
Yeah, I think summer 2018 is always interesting to me because it feels in many ways to me, I'm going to try to explain this as best I can.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's way better, and there's way more accomplishments in musically, set listing, all that sort of stuff than 2014 or 2016. So I want to be
Mm-hmm.
clear there. But 2013 and 2015 Phish are clear peak moments, and for me, the run from Atlanta through Magna Ball is some of the in
Oh,
2015 is some of the strongest Phish that I've ever heard, and my favorite Phish I've ever been a part of. Sans Fall 2021. The Baker's Dozen had a similar effect. It was all encompassing, and I remember going into summer 2018 kind of accepting that it was going to take them a bit of time to shed that and to get past that. And part of
yeah.
the eternal beauty and challenge with Phish is the constant evolution. They're never going to peak something and try to stay there. They're going to peak something and try to move on to whatever's next. And to me, 2018 is a lot better going back to listen to it than it was in the moment. In the moment, it felt slightly frustrating only because we had seen a peak moment in Fish's overall career a year
Right.
prior. That when they got to 2018, it was suddenly like, well, what do we do next? Well, they've got the jamming. So the jamming's going to come along. Like that Gorge show, night 3 is one of my favorite shows from that year from
It's an awesome
3.0
show.
Phish. But you also have, these pretty uneven shows. Like I saw the 2 Forum shows followed by Austin. And those shows have like a show's worth of highlights, but they're kind of scattered throughout. And you get these,
Right.
weird set listing choices mixed with
I
really
actually,
inventive jamming.
funny enough, I think Austin's second set is the most 2015 thing that they did in 2018, because it starts off with the big punch of Everything's Right Disease and then kind of has like songs for the rest of it, which is
Yeah.
a very 2015 thing to do.
And bringing this whole thing full circle, I saw my first Seven Below since Coventry at that show,
Ah, there it
which
is.
was, I was just like, I was in the crowd. I had pit tickets. I was about 10 feet from the band, and I just like arms up in total celebration. It wasn't the greatest Seven Below, but it was great to see it in the
Yeah,
moment.
my parents were there. They did the Forum in Austin on that
Nice.
run. Well, yeah, it always comes back to the topic eventually. See, we're 40 minutes in, and we spent like 5 minutes talking about the jams. I do want to, I want to mention one thing about my pick, which is that last or that crazy space funk segment that starts around 13 minutes.
Yeah.
With like, Paige going off on the clav, like Trey doing crazy delay nonsense, Mike on that like deep synth bass line. Like, it's awesome. That's a really cool jam idea that they used a few times during the Mexico run in 2019. It shows up in the Seven Below, actually, that we're talking about here, follows kind of a similar pattern to the February 21st, 2019 I Always Wanted It This Way,
Oh,
where it
good
gets
call.
kind of
Yeah.
that peak in and then transitions to this crazy space funk jam. This space funk thing also shows up in the February 22nd Set Your Soul Free.
This is a really good point, and it's something I want to illuminate as well. And it's something about summer 2018 that I did love, and it's something that I think that they would not have gotten without the Baker's Dozen. The Baker's Dozen was this moment where any song is on the table, and any song can be jammed, and this is the first time that that's happened really since 2.0. Like, it seems commonplace now, but if you go back to 2017 Phish, There was a lot
Oh,
of tension in the audience about, are they going to ripcord this jam or are they going to let it go? And the Baker's Dozen was really the first time where you could be 15 minutes into a jam and pretty confidently see yourself having another 10 minutes of the jam. And that to me, that's a really special thing. But the one flaw of those jams, now we could nitpick these to death, but the one flaw I always hear of those Baker's Dozen jams is they take a long time getting to the peak, but they all end up peaking, and that's it. And something
hmm.
they really introduced and pushed in summer 2018. Perfect example of this is the August 3rd, 2018 Carini, where
Oh,
they would play a jam, they would peak it, and then the final 6 or 7 minutes would be this post peak jamming, where they'd take
yes.
whatever the idea was of the peak and distort it and play against it and play within it. And it almost kind of was a harkening back to the Hey Hole jamming from summer 93, where like a riff could be a riff, but then Trey would play a riff and then Mike would play it in a little bit more of like a demented way. And then Paige would screw around with it. And then Trey would
Yeah.
copy them, but he would twist it around. And
Yeah.
that
The August 4th, 2018 Soul Planet's also a great example of that.
a perfect example of it. One of my favorite versions of Soul Planet. And the Seven Below from New Year's Eve really showcases what the band could do at this point, because you have this immediate post jam that sounds like the wheel, this immediate jam post song that sounds like the wheel. And then that peaks, and then that kind of crests and goes into this post peak jamming, where this like space funk that you're talking about, which you would hear again absolutely in Mexico, and you wouldn't hear as much in summer 2019, but you would really hear it towards the tail end of 2018. um, it's just a fascinating part of this Seven Below that when I was re-listening to it, it's a version that almost no one talks about, but it's a version that like really informs what they were going after stylistically at the time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. One thing I do want to talk about too is Paige's Rhodes work in this jam.
Mm, mm.
And I would like to take this opportunity to plug that I have T-shirts that support Paige playing the Rhodes. Link in the description of this episode for the We Move Through Stormy Weather merch store. It's pretty
Love
cool.
it. I love it.
Um, um, now I forgot what I was going to say after that. Um, another good version of Seven Below that's really awesome. Not only the numbers show from Vegas this past fall, but also the Baker's Dozen version from the
Yeah,
first night. It's the first real awesome Type 2 jam of the run.
totally.
And it just hits this like amazingly euphoric peak. Great use of Paige's new at the time Moog Voyager. And I did. Sorry, do you want to say something about that? I just remembered what I was going to say before.
No, I mean, I agree. That's a great version. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that jam.
There we go. Okay, so one thing that 2018 has that was also kind of part of why the transition to 2019 was so weird is 2018 has this jagged sound. A lot in part due to
Yeah,
Trey's new tone that year, very high gain, very, very dirty, like, lots of, it's jagged is the best word to describe it. And so, it's all over this jam, like even in his solos, it's just like a screaming lead guitar. And then in 2019, Paige's synth also, it's a very aggressive sound a lot of the time, also has kind of a jagged edge to it sometimes. And this is when Paige was using the Moog Voyager synthesizer, which he had from 2017 through Mexico 2019. And then for summer 2019, he got the Moog One, which is what he has
mm,
now. And that one has a much softer
mm.
sound. So Trey's tone also got a lot softer in 2019. And so, you're kind of going from this very in your face, high gain, screaming leads all the time to them going a lot more into more relaxed and more dark and spacey jams, which they do for much of 2019. There's a lot less big peak jams, which you talked about being all over the place in 2017 and still all over the place in 2018. And they kind of, what they did in 2019 is, you mentioned how in 2018, you'd have that peak jam, but then it would keep going into darkness after. They just kind of
Yeah,
took out the peak jam of that. And so they were just
yeah.
going into the darkness all the time. which, as much as people rag on them for doing big peak jams all the time, by the time, that Thanksgiving week tour rolled around, I was like dying without like a big peaky jam coming around. Like, the Charleston Night 3, I think it was like I Always Wanted It This Way, like briefly goes type 2 and has like it's like 10 minutes, but it has like this peak. And I remember being like, yes, finally, like I've been waiting for this jam.
Well, it's a really good point, and it's something that I think about a lot with this gap of 2020 between, Mexico 2020 and Arkansas 2021. And obviously all the music that's come since in 2021. I think one of the things I love the most about 2019, that vulnerability I was speaking about a little bit ago, you hear it in their jamming, like you're talking about. There's not a lot of peaking. There's not a lot of like a desire to play a rock show. I think about the Birds of a Feather from Blossom. I think about the Down with Disease and Sense and Subtle Sounds. No,
From
Down with
SPAC?
Disease and Piper from Banger. It's Down with Disease.
Oh, yes.
Or is it Simple? It's Simple. It's not Piper. Excuse me.
Yeah,
It
it's simple.
opens the second set with Down with Disease, Play by Play, and Simple. I think about.
I need to go listen to some 2019.
That's a really good
it's been
segment.
a
I think
while.
it's the second. I think it's the second night of Banger.
That's the first night. The second night of Banger is the Fuego City's Final Hurrah, which is also fantastic.
Thank you. That's an awesome segment as well. I think about the Mohegan show in full, which feels like such a singular piece of music from note one to the conclusion, and it really feels like they're just like smearing this sound of like experimental vulnerability and aging in music and death in music.
Yeah, that's Sea of Stars.
The Sea of Stars, exactly. I think about the Ghost from Night 2 at Dick's. These jams that did not need a peak, that just needed sounds and ideas and further exploration just for the sake of. And that's something I really loved about that era. And you hear almost now in 2021 all these lessons of the past 6 or 7 years. 2015 being this return of Trey really being the capable leader and really pushing jams forward with a ton of
I think 2015, because of that, 2015 is so full of just bliss peak jams because Trey's just enjoying, like, I can play again. Like,
I can do this.
He's doing it.
2017, what we've talked about with the Bakers Dozen, this like return of extended 25
anything can
jamming.
happen. Yeah.
Anything can happen. 2018, you take that idea and you figure out where's the darkness on the other side. 2019, you hear this band kind of flattening everything out and figuring out like, let's just experiment this segment regardless if this leads to like a narrative peak. And then you get this break, which is a really important break because when they come back, they take all these lessons and they approach 2021 with this renewed vigor because suddenly they've realized once again for the first time in over a decade, we could lose this at a moment's notice. Like this could be gone and we could never play another concert again. So let's play every single show like it's our last. Plus you have 6 years of really creative and thoughtful jamming that informs where the band is. And they come into 2021 taking that experience and taking those jams that are kind of swirling around their head, whether they're conscious of it or not, and applying it to intentionality. And as a result, you get this just like, I mean, my favorite Phish year since 2003 was 2021. So like you get this just totally inspired year of Phish.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I mean, 2021, even, I saw 3 shows. They were the only shows I saw this year. Obviously I was supposed to be at MSG this past weekend, but unfortunately that didn't happen. But yeah, they were some of the best concerts I've ever seen, and just like the pure joy at seeing Phish again after not seeing live music since January 2020, and seeing them perform at such a high level, which I haven't been lucky enough to do. For the most part, outside of the 2 shows I saw on fall 2018, I've had like just some bad luck seeing Phish shows. Like the one show I saw fall 2013, Rochester. Like So,
At least you got a
and
good cross-eyed.
it was pretty good. My dad talks about this all the time. There's a point like midway through that jam where Trey turns around to fiddle with something on his amp, but the rest of the band thinks that he's ending the jam. So there's this kind of like misstep, and Trey
Yeah.
kind of like pulls it back and is like, "No, we're still going." And so that was just a weird and disjointed show, but it was my second show and I was 13 and I loved it. So,
Can I ask you something?
yeah, absolutely.
So I first got into Phish with 2.0. You
Yeah.
first got into Phish, I'm guessing, with 3.0, although I'm guessing you have been listening to this music your whole life. What does 2.0 sound like to you based on when you got into Phish and where you're at as a Phish fan?
Yeah, so I got into Phish via Super Bowl. My dad
Okay.
went and then gave me the 3 shows on my iPod, which I started listening to when I was in like grade 5. The Reba was what hooked me.
Yeah, it's a great Reba.
I fell in love with that. And I didn't consciously listen to a note of 1.0 until 2017. Like I didn't I didn't look on the internet for like audience tapes. I just had what was on my iPod, which was Super Bowl, and then I webcasted the New Year's Eve show, so I got that, and then I was my library expanded to like maybe 10 shows, and then in high school, I started high school in 2014, and by this time I was kind of like webcasting a few shows here and there, like you know, not really very many because I go to camp every summer, so I miss the whole summer tour, but I do the New Year's show. And I was pretty much exclusively listening to, just those few years of 3.0. And the only time I've actually ever gotten bored of Phish was in early 2018 when I was exclusively listening to like 2015, 16, and 17 Phish.
Yeah.
That was it. And then 2018 happened and I got more into 1.0. But I remember I listened to the Island Tour in 2017 because one of my only friends who's close to my age who loves Phish was like, you have to listen to the Island Tour. You never heard it. You have to listen to it. So I listened to it and I was like, this is awesome. I need to hear more. And so I, got more into 1.0. And then I don't remember when I listened to 2.0 for the first time, but I know it was the 22803 Tweezer.
Okay.
And I just remember it's a very different sound, obviously. It's a lot darker. It's a lot grittier, which at the time I liked because it was late 2018, I believe. So I was, obviously developing my obsession with fall 2018 as it was happening. Yeah, I just remember also feeling like it was a bit disjointed. Like I'm not a huge fan of like the Oxy jams of later 2003 and 2004. I think the Spack Piper has about 8 minutes of really interesting jamming in it, and the rest is kind of like them searching for an idea, which I think happens a lot in the Seven Below as well. It's also 20 minutes long and doesn't really go type 2 at all. The 12:31:18 jam starts going type 2 at like 6.5 minutes in.
Right.
So I think I like the efficiency of Phish now better. Like I can appreciate them taking the 20 minutes to get to that point. Like, them taking 17 minutes to get to that point in the Spack Piper where it just explodes into that Tweezer reprise jam and is incredible. But to me, I'll always prefer, sitting down and like diving into a jam and like it's interesting the whole time and grabs me the whole time. And, that's my main gripe with Fall 97 as well. A lot of the jams to me are like funk groove. Trey starts soloing and not listening to the rest of the band. It gets kind of soupy and dissonant and then goes back to the funk groove. And there's a peak in there somewhere, and then I love Summer 97 because it's like a cleaner version of that. You don't have that Trey goes Hendrix mode. He's listening to the band a lot more. I think Summer 97 ends up being a lot more cohesive. Like the Lakewood Ghost is one of my top 5 Phish jams of all time.
Interesting.
The Boise Bag is also in my top 5.
Yeah. Same here.
I've found like a real affinity for later 1999 in the last few months. Really, I've really been enjoying that music. So my perspective constantly changes as I absorb more and more of their repertoire. Like, I don't feel the same way about, a few years ago I was like, all of 1.0 is boring and too long. I don't like it. Now, obviously, I can appreciate that, and I think, also kind of branching out into a smaller number of other bands has helped. Like I started listening to a lot more Grateful Dead over the pandemic,
Sure.
obviously getting into Goose as well. It just makes me appreciate what Phish does more. And, I can be a little bit, I can be critical in a different way.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to hear your perspective because, like, I did not know that you went that long without listening to 1.0 Phish, but 2.0 is it's its own thing, and it's for me, when I got into Phish, all I had was 1.0 Phish, and all I had was, well, this was the band, and when they
Right.
came back, there was a very clear shift in the sound, and it was almost clear from the moment that they played the first show that they still hadn't figured out the issues that plagued them towards the tail end of 1.0, and it was going to be a bit of a rocky period, and nobody knew how long it was going to last. Obviously, when Trey sent out the announcement note in May of 2004, everyone was shocked because there had been good enough moments throughout late summer 2003 and Miami that people figured, well, they just have to get a little bit healthy and they'll keep playing again. Plus, they announced a festival. So it's definitely its own vibe. I think for me, the thing that interests me the most about 2.0, at least at this point, is that is usually the end chapter for most bands.
Right.
If you look across like the classic rock lineage, and the return in 09 is usually when like they don't try as hard and they
They play the
rely on,
hits.
they play the hits, they give you the show that like reinvents the idea of what your perspective of the band is.
They play the stadiums with John Mayer. Like,
Right. But here, like, and I would argue even since the start of 09, they were consciously trying to rebuild.
yeah,
It didn't become much, it didn't become totally apparent until mid 2012. But when you go back to that February 03 run, you hear this band that is able to play a jam at will without much effort. And that
yeah,
7 Below to me is this opportunity for them to take a new song and incorporate it with the style of jamming that allows them to really go anywhere. Whereas to your point, the 2018 version, you hear a band that has worked really, really hard over the preceding decade to put themselves in a position where they are able to turn on and turn off jamming as they want to.
yeah.
And to your point, when they decide they want to jam, they've immediately got a riff, they've immediately got an idea, they've immediately got direction that they want to go in. And they also now know once we get to that peak, we can do something on the other side of it. So
Keep going. Yeah.
it's two very different eras and very different approaches to Phish. And the fact that it's all wrapped in this song that I said at the beginning, I originally did not like, is now one of my favorite Phish songs, and one of my favorite songs to see live is All the Better.
Yeah. Well, that seems like a great place to wrap up the episode. Thank you so much, Brian, for being on today. It's been a pleasure talking 7 Below and all these other incredible topics with you. I hope everyone has enjoyed listening. Don't forget, go sign up for the mailing list for ryanstorm.substack.com. Again, lots of jam breakdowns, jam breakdowns, show reviews, and more on the site. We Moved Through Stormy Weather is back for 2022.
Thanks, man. This was a ton of fun. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you for being on. Thank you for listening to this episode of We Move Through Stormy Weather. Hope you have a fantastic day. I will see you next time.